There is a ruler inside you that never needed a crown. It doesn't kick down doors or shout orders. Most days it whispers. It wears your tone. It borrows your logic. And it signs every decision with your name while convincing you it was just how things are. You feel it the moment you wake. The hand that reaches for a screen before it reaches for breath. The flicker of comparison. The quiet audit of your worth. You call it habit, distraction, anxiety. But the Sufis gave it a sharper name. The nafs, the lower self. It has built a court in your skull. Judges made of old memories, advisors made of fear. A treasury stocked with someday. It feeds on your attention the way a fire feeds on oxygen. And in a world engineered to keep you craving, the tyrant doesn't need chains. It only needs your consent, given in tiny daily surrenders you barely notice. The question is whether it exists. The question is, who is ruling whom? And what happens when you stop negotiating and start taming? In Jung's language, this inner ruler is not simply bad behavior. It is an autonomous complex, an energy center in the psyche that behaves like a person with its own agenda. Jung called its dark reservoir the shadow. Everything you refuse to be, everything you disown to remain lovable, safe, acceptable. What you repress does not die. It gathers weight. It develops strategy. In the old occult maps, this is why the beast cannot be slain. Try to kill it, and it returns wearing a subtler mask. Starve it, and it begins to feed on your virtues. You become disciplined, puri, spiritual, and secretly addicted to the image of being those things. The alchemists warned of this. The first matter, the prima materia, is filthy not because it is evil, but because it is mixed. Desire fused with identity. Fear fused with morality. Hunger fused with holiness. Attar hinted at the same trap in his great bird allegory. The flock begins the journey longing for God, but many are really longing for a cosmic witness, someone to finally approve of them. That is the tyrant's oldest trick, to disguise craving as destiny. If the beast can be killed, what must be done instead is far more intimate and more dangerous. The dangerous part is this. Taming begins with a descent, not into fantasy, but into the place where your justifications are born. The Sufis spoke of stations of the nafs, levels of selfhood, like climates a traveler must cross. The first is the commanding self, the one that issues orders in the form of urges. Now, more, prove it, take it. It doesn't always look selfish. Sometimes it looks noble. Sometimes it appears as righteous anger, or wounded innocence, or I'm just telling the truth. Jung called this inflation. The ego identifying with archetypal power and mistaking that borrowed electricity for spiritual authority. When the ego puts on an archetype, it feels divine. And that feeling is intoxicating. Here is the occult reality. The tyrant thrives on unconsciousness. It rules best when you believe you are simply being yourself. It says, "This is my personality." But personality can be a prison. The alchemists began their work with nigredo, the blackening, because nothing can transform until it is seen. No gold emerges from denial. No liberation emerges from a story you refuse to interrogate. So we begin where it's uncomfortable, by catching the tyrant in the act, without theatrics, without self-hatred, just clear sight. And sight, once gained, starts a chain reaction. A story from an older lodge of wisdom, told in different tongues across Persia, speaks of a man named Nadir who sought out a quiet teacher, Sheikh Salim. Nadir complained, I've given charity. I've kept night prayers. I've memorized sacred texts. Yet I feel no peace. People are cruel. Fate is unjust. Heaven is silent. Salim did argue theology. He asked one question. When you gave, did you hide it, or did you let it shine? Nadir hesitated. People should learn from good examples, he said quickly. And when you pray, Salim continued, do you pray where no one can applaud you, or where devotion has an audience? Nadir shifted again. In the congregation, he replied. That's the proper place. Salim's expression softened, like a physician recognizing a familiar illness. Then you did give, he said. You purchased admiration. And you did pray. You performed. The nafs is clever, Nadir. It will fast for the sake of being seen as someone who fasts. It will kneel for the sake of being known as someone who kneels. This is the tyrant's holy costume. It doesn't crave pleasure only. It craves status. Even spiritual status. And that is why many seekers never escape. They renovate the prison and call it a temple. Jung had a brutal phrase for this. The ego steals light. It borrows the energy of the self, capital S, the deeper totality, and claims it as personal achievement. That is why the tyrant can look like a saint. It's not only lust and greed, it's the need to be someone. And modern life is the perfect feeding ground. The algorithm rewards performance, not transformation. It trains the psyche to turn even sincerity into content. So the commanding self evolves. It becomes the enlightened brand, the wounded oracle, the humble genius. It says, look how self-aware I am. In Sufi terms, this is still the lowest station, because the compass is pointed outward. The nafs lives on measurement. Likes, attention, comparison, victory, humiliation. It is never finished. It only pauses to sharpen its appetite. The first alchemical move is not purity. It's decomposition. Nigredo means you let the false gold rot. You allow your image of yourself to darken. You stop defending your narrative long enough to see the machinery beneath it. This is why taming the beast feels like dying, because something does die. The persona you relied on. The costume you thought was your skin. Attar's birds tremble at this threshold. Many turn back, not because the journey is hard, but because the mirror is honest. And when the mirror becomes unavoidable, the second station appears. The second station is the self-reproaching self. The inner court flips. The tyrant stops praising itself and begins sentencing itself. Suddenly, you see what you've done, what you've avoided, what you've justified. You notice the small cruelties, the hidden bargains, the ways you used principle as a weapon and love as a leash. This is the moment many confuse with healing, because there are tears, confessions, self-awareness. But the mystics warned. This valley has mirages. The ego can turn guilt into identity. Jung called it negative inflation. Instead of I am superior, the voice becomes I am uniquely broken. Both keep you central. Both keep you special. Attar painted this valley with frightening images. A bird who rips out its own feathers after glimpsing its true motives. Another that blinds itself to avoid further seeing. Not because truth is cruel, but because the nafs cannot tolerate being dethroned. It would rather destroy the traveler than surrender the throne. Modern culture often tries to soften this stage with affirmations. You are perfect as you are. There's a place for compassion, yes. But if compassion becomes anesthesia, nothing changes. The self-reproaching stage is meant to crack the armor, not polish it. So the task here is surgical, to feel remorse without becoming a cult of shame, to witness your darkness without building a palace inside it. Because the way out is not self-hatred. It's a new kind of attention. The Sufis named that new attention muhasabah, self-accounting, paired with muraqabah, watchful presence. One is the ledger, the other is the lantern. Together they prevent a common failure. You either excuse yourself endlessly, or you condemn yourself endlessly. Both are tyranny. Jung would say, the goal is to hold the tension of opposites without collapsing into either pole. To admit, yes, I am capable of deception, without concluding, therefore, I am nothing but deception. To see your shadow as a part of the psyche, not the whole of it. This is integration. The beast brought into the circle of consciousness so it can no longer operate like a hidden dictator. And here is the occult secret. When you can observe an impulse without obeying it, you have already begun to transmute it. That tiny gap between urge and action is the crucible. It is where raw energy stops being faked and becomes fuel. In the alchemical texts, after the blackening comes a strange pale light, albedo, the whitening. Not moral purity, but clarification. The moment the psyche begins to reflect something higher instead of burning for attention. Like the moon, bright not by its own fire, but by receiving and returning light. This is the third station, the inspired self, and it rarely arrives with fireworks. It arrives as a quieter mind, a slower reaction, a new ability to ask in the heat of temptation. What is this really hungry for? To answer that question, an old story is told about a pond and a fish. A young seeker named Yahya came to a reclusive guide, Ustad Marwan, furious with himself. I've tried to crush my desires, he said. I fast until my body shakes. I deny pleasure. I punish the flesh. And still the urges return, stronger, like demons that multiply when struck. Marwan did debate ethics. He led Yahya to a small garden pond where fish moved in lazy circles. Catch one, he said, without touching the water. Yahya stared. That's impossible. Marwan nodded. Exactly. Now tell me why you believe you can seize the soul with violence when you cannot seize a fish with rage. Yahya began to argue, but Marwan cut him off. The fish is not caught by chasing, he said. It is caught by conditions. Safety. Patience. A single place where food appears consistently. The fish comes because it trusts the environment. Then he turned, eyes steady. Your desire is the same. It is not an enemy to exterminate. It is life force looking for a home. If the home is chaos, it becomes addiction. If the home is clarity, it becomes power. This is the shift. You stop trying to win a war and start learning a language. Hunger, anger, craving. These are energies. In Ibn Arabi's vision, every force is a veil. It hides the real and also hints at it. Your worst impulses may be distorted prayers, and distorted prayers can be purified without being denied. Most people never ask what an impulse is actually trying to do. They only label it bad habit, weakness, my personality. But the psyche is symbolic. Jung insisted, symptoms are not random. They are messages from the unconscious, written in the only alphabet it trusts. Image, emotion, compulsion. So when you feel the urge to scroll, ask what you were really seeking. Relief from restlessness? Escape from emptiness? A hit of belonging. When you feel the urge to dominate a conversation, ask what you were protecting. A fear of being irrelevant? A fear of being seen? When you feel the urge to numb out, ask what pain is approaching the surface. This is why the shadow often guards the treasure. The beast blocks the gate because behind the gate is a power you once could handle. Anger might be the buried boundary. Envy might be the buried vocation. Addiction might be the hunger for the sacred with no altar to land on. Rumi's Masnavi circles this truth again and again. The thing that burns you is often the thing that cooks you into nourishment. The heat is not always punishment. Sometimes it's maturation wearing a harsh face. In alchemy, you don't throw away the base matter. You work it. You subject it to fire and attention until it reveals its hidden sulfur and salt, its passions and structures, so it can be recombined into something coherent. That coherence is the beginning of sovereignty. You don't become desireless. You become directed. The tyrant loses power when its energy is given a lawful role. But there's a final misunderstanding we must cut through. Befriending the beast is not indulging it. Befriending the shadow does not mean handing it the keys. It means inviting it into the room where decisions are made, so it can stop plotting in the basement. The difference is everything. Repression creates possession. Indulgence creates addiction. Integration creates choice. Jung's active imagination was built for this. You speak to the inner figures, you listen, you negotiate, without surrendering the throne. The Sufis did the same when they addressed the nafs like a difficult guest. I hear you, but you will not rule. In Ibn Arabi's cosmology, the soul is a theater of divine names, merciful, just, subtle, majestic, each appearing through you as a mode of reality. When one name dominates unconsciously, it becomes distortion. When they are harmonized consciously, the human becomes a mirror. That's the occult goal here, not self-improvement, but inner governance. A functional inner republic instead of a coup. And governance requires a paradox the spiritual marketplace avoids: surrender. Not passive surrender, weaponized acceptance that excuses weakness, but surrender as alignment. The higher will does not arrive because you quit. It arrives because you stop lying to yourself. There is an old saying attributed to the sages: trust the real, then secure the rope. The point is not to float above responsibility. It's to carry responsibility so fully that your actions become clean. The advanced stations of the nafs describe this. A self no longer at war with itself. Desire still exists, but it no longer dictates. The beast is still alive, but it has been trained to serve. So how do you practice this? Today, inside modern chaos, start by building what the Sufis called khalwa, retreat. Not necessarily a cave, a boundary, a small jurisdiction where the tyrant cannot campaign for attention. 10 minutes is enough if it's real. No phone. No performance, no fixing. Just presence. Sit and watch. This is muraqabah, awareness that doesn't immediately vote on what it sees. Thoughts rise, plead their case, demand action. Let them speak. Feel the body's impulses like weather. Notice how quickly the nafs tries to seize the moment. Answer that. Check that. Prove that. Escape that. Then do something Jung would recognize instantly. Document the patterns. Not as a diary of feelings, but as intelligence gathering. What triggers the beast? Fatigue? Loneliness? Praise? Criticism? Certain people? Certain hours? Give the tyrant a name if it helps, because naming creates distance. In Man and His Symbols, Jung emphasized that symbols mediate the unconscious. A named pattern becomes visible, workable. Next, catch the tyrant's favorite disguise: urgency. The nafs rules through now. Your practice is to insert a pause, 3 breaths, a hand on the chest, a single question. What am I trying to avoid feeling? That question opens the trapdoor beneath the habit. And beneath the habit is usually a core emotion. Grief, fear, emptiness, longing. Which brings us to the alchemical formula the old adepts loved. Solve et cogula. Solve et cogula means dissolve and recombine. Most people try to coagulate first, force a new routine, install discipline, declare a fresh identity. But if you skip dissolving, you just build a prettier cage. Dissolving is inquiry. When the habit appears, don't rush to murder it. Interrogate it like a symbol. What is this protecting me from? What need is it trying to meet? What would I have to face if I did do this? You will find strange truths. The craving is guarding you from sadness. The perfectionism is guarding you from being ordinary, which is guarding you from rejection. The anger is guarding a boundary that was violated long ago. The constant productivity is guarding you from the terror of stillness, because in stillness, you might hear what you've been avoiding. This is why the beast feels ancient. It is Tanli, you. It's you plus your conditioning, your lineage, your culture, what Jung called the collective strata. Archetypal patterns move through personal wounds like water through channels. When you dissolve down to the core need, then coagulate. Build a conscious way to meet that need. If you scroll for belonging, create belonging that is algorithmic. If you numb to avoid grief, give grief a ritual. Music, prayer, a walk without input. A conversation that costs you pride. Alchemy is patient. It is not motivational. It is methodical. And it often requires companionship. A teacher, a therapist, a disciplined friend. Someone who can see the tyrant when you can see. But there's one more pillar without which nothing holds. Dhikr, remembrance. Dhikr, in its traditional form, is the repetition of divine names. Reminding the heart what is real when the mind is drunk on noise. Psychologically, it's the practice of remembering your true position in the psyche. You are not the impulse. You are the witness of the impulse. When the tyrant shouts, Dhikr is how you refuse the hypnotic spell. You don't argue with the thought. You return to the ground beneath it. Breath, sensation, presence. A phrase that anchors you. Not this. Not now. I see you. Jung's individuation is a similar returning. Again and again, you disidentify from the mask and move closer to the self, the organizing center larger than the ego. The ego wants to be the sun. Remembrance teaches it to become the moon. Reflective, receptive, precise. And here's the paradox. Once you stop identifying with the tyrant becomes less tyrannical. It doesn't need to scream when it is being obeyed. It becomes like an animal that stops biting once it trusts the handler. The energy remains, but the compulsion loosens. This is also why the work never finishes. Embodiment means desire will keep arising. Shadow will keep updating. Every new phase of life calls up a new layer. The aim is not a permanent victory. It is a permanent relationship, awareness that keeps the throne occupied. Attar's birds learned this the hard way, and the final revelation of their journey contains the sharpest medicine. After crossing 7 valleys, hunger, love, knowledge, detachment, unity, bewilderment, annihilation. The remaining birds reach the summit to meet the sovereign they sought. They expect a blazing other, an ultimate authority to reward their suffering. Instead, they find a mirror, not a flattering mirror, a merciless one. And in it, they see themselves, yet altered. Their feathers are torn, their eyes different. The journey has stripped away the costumes. What stares back is not the anxious creature that began the flight, but a being simplified by fire. Here is the occult punchline. The seeker and the sought were never separate. The king was not outside. It was the self revealed when the false rulers fall away. The submerge is not a trophy. It is an identity shift. Jung would say, at the end of individuation, you don't become perfect. You become whole. The shadow is no longer an outlaw. It is a citizen. The instincts are no longer enemy armies. They are trained forces. Even the nafs is not destroyed. It is converted. The tyrant becomes a servant of a deeper order. And that conversion is the alchemist's rubido. The reddening, the stage of blood and rose, where opposites marry, light and dark, conscious and unconscious, human and divine. So when you return to ordinary life, work, relationships, habits, the question becomes brutally simple. Who is sitting on the throne today? So we end where we began, only with different eyes. The tyrant still lives in you. The beast still prowls the corridors of mind. But now you can recognize its dialects. Urgency, comparison, performance, shame, spiritual pride. You can feel its hunger rise, and not confuse hunger with destiny. The work is not to banish the beast. The work is to enthrone the witness. 10 minutes of kalwa. One honest ledger of triggers. One pause before the compulsive reach. One act of solve it kogila. Dissolve the pattern to its need. Then build a cleaner way to meet it. One dicker-like return to what is real when the mind is noisy. And if you fail, good. Failure reveals the next layer. Even the great masters said the inner struggle is lifelong. Not because you are cursed, but because you are alive. Here's the final question, sharp enough to cut illusions. Who is the one that wants to be free? Is it the self calling you home? Or is it the tyrant wearing another mask, craving the identity of liberated? Sit with that. Don't answer quickly. The throne is always available. The beast is always listening.